In this video, we'll be looking at some tools for dealing with files. Specifically, we'll be looking at the commands cat, head, tail, and less. First, let's talk about cat. Cat has one basic function that it does, and that is to display the contents of files. So if we do an ls, I'm in a directory here that I made just to have these two files to make it sort of clean visually. These two files, hamlet.txt and macbeth.txt, are available in your working files directory, so you can follow along. And these are simply the text of two famous Shakespeare soliloquies. We have Hamlet's to be or not to be speech and Macbeth's hallucination about the dagger. And this is just to give us some text to work with as we do these commands. Let's start with the cat command. Cat can take no arguments or take an argument. In this case, I'm going to give it the argument of hamlet.txt. The arguments to the cat command can be one or more files, and we'll see both of those cases. Cat hamlet.txt. And you can see some text pops up. It goes by very quickly because the computer's pretty fast at displaying the text. What happened here? I just displayed the entire contents of the file. The file is long enough that it exceeds the size of my terminal window. Now I can come over here with my pointer and I can scroll back and I can see the full text of the file. But we've just stepped out of the command line here. We're not using the command line anymore to do that. We're using the GUI to look back in what happened on the command line. So we really don't want to do that. We can do something a little better in a little bit. But first, the basic function of cat, it takes the text in the file and outputs it to the screen. I can give it both files, Hamlet and Macbeth. And if I do that, I get, looks like maybe the tail end of Macbeth's soliloquy. And again, if I scroll back, I can see that we started with Hamlet and then we went to Macbeth. And you'll also see right in here, there's no break between the two files. It just ended one and started the other. And that actually gets to why this command is called cat. Cat is short for catenate or concatenate. They're synonyms. Cat takes whatever you tell it to use and concatenates it all and displays the result. It may seem weird to use the word cat. Cat this file means to display this file. You'll get used to that usage, but it actually comes from concatenate or catenate. Cat kind of shows us everything, and it may or may not be useful to us. Let's look at a tool that can show us a little less. Maybe we suspect that Hamlet is that speech, because we've worked with it before or something like that, but we're not entirely sure. We can use the command head, and if we use that, by default, head shows us the first 10 lines of a file. And we can see, yes, indeed, that is the to be or not to be speech. We can change with an argument how many lines we're going to show. So for instance, we can say, give me 5 lines. And the argument for the number of lines is simply a minus sign and the number of lines. We can do head -1 and show just the first line. We can do any number of lines. You get the idea of how that goes. So a question you might ask at this point, what happens if I say more lines than are in the file? What if I say, give me 1,500 lines of Hamlet? Hamlet itself is more than 1,500 lines, but this speech isn't. We do that, and we just get the whole file. So it's no big deal if you specify more lines than there really are. Now, a cool thing that head does, if I say head -5 and I give it both files. By the way, I'm just typing a tab here to complete that. This is a feature of Bash. If you type part of a name and hit tab, it will attempt to complete it. If it's unique, it will just complete the name for you. If it's not, it'll show you the various choices. So that's just a handy little shorthand to prevent some typing. If I do a head on both of these files, what I get is kind of a nice little format. It tells me, okay, here's the first 5 lines of hamlet.txt, and here's the first 5 lines of macbeth.txt. You can do that for up to as many files as you possibly wanted to. The similar command to head, not too surprisingly, called tail. So if I take the tail of Hamlet, just like with head, I see the last 10 lines of the file. We'll just do a blank there to visually separate that. If I do a tail -1, I get the very last line of that speech, etc. It is documented in the documentation I looked at that this should work, just like it did with the other. But it actually doesn't work in this version of tail. But we can do a variant of this and tell it explicitly that we want 5 lines, and then we get an output similar to the head output, but doing the last 5 lines from each file. So we can put the whole file out, we can look at just the beginning of the file, we can look at just the end of the file. What if we actually wanted to read the file? So again, if I do cat hamlet.txt, I can't really read that from the command line. I can scroll back in the terminal window, but like we said, that's cheating. That's using the GUI. So what if I actually want to read it? Well, there's a command that can do that as well. There's a command called less, and here's what less does. It starts showing me the file, and it stops at the end of a screen. And it's actually giving me a prompt here. So I have the first one screen full of text. And I can hit space to go forward a screen. I can hit B to go back. I can do the return character to go down one line. There's a bunch of other things I can do in there, but those are sort of the main things. If you do want to see all the other things that less can do, you can type H for help, and you will see a very large list of commands that you can do in less. Don't worry about those to start with. Space to advance, B to go back, return if you want to go by one line. That's pretty much enough to get you to move around. Now when I get to the end, I'm hitting space now and nothing's happening. So how do I get out of the file? Well, that's the one extra thing you need to know. Q for quit gets you out of the file. Like with head and tail, I can specify more than one file with my less. So if I do Hamlet, here I have Hamlet. Same thing, I get to the end, I'm pushing space, nothing's happening. I can do Q, and if I do Q, I just quit right out. That's not terribly helpful to me because I didn't see the next file. To show the next file, I have to type a colon and an N, and then I get to the next file. And then finally, Q to leave.